Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my standard review of the new Tamron 150-500mm F5-6.7 Di3 VC VXD lens. Now, because Tamron does like to give us fairly long and complicated names, I'll give you a quick breakdown of what that means. This is a variable aperture zoom lens that goes from 150mm on the wide end out to 500mm on the telephoto end, making it a very, very useful focal range. It has a variable aperture that at its smallest point is f6.7. Fortunately, that doesn't happen until after 400mm, and so for the most of the range, you actually have a bit of an aperture advantage compared to the Sony 200-600mm f5.6 to 6.3. It's only when it finally goes to f6.7, which is 1/3 stop smaller, that is the only time that it actually has a smaller maximum aperture. It is Di3, which means it's made for mirrorless in Tamron, speak, and it is specifically designed for Sony full-frame E-mount, or Sony FE. And then it has their VC, or vibration compensation, which I will point out is the first full-frame lens designed for Sony by Tamron. That it employs their VC system, which certainly helps. You wouldn't want to rely solely on in-body image stabilization with a focal length this long. So I'm really glad to see that here. And then also it has their VXD focus motor, which is a linear motor but a high torque version that so far they've only employed on one other lens, also a telephoto, the 70-180mm f2.8. And so what you've got here is the bona fides to be a genuinely competitive lens, and it slots really neatly in between the more inexpensive, smaller, but more range constricted and not quite as at the same level of performance Sigma 100-400mm DN lens. And then on the upper end, we have got the kind of the big dog here, and that is the Sony 200-600mm f5.6 G OSS lens. This is a fabulous lens, and I gave it a really glowing review, and I ended up buying one myself after my review point because it's just such a good lens, even though, as you can see, it is a dramatically larger lens. More on that in just a second. But the Sigma retails for somewhere in the under $1,000 US range. The 200-600mm from Sony is about $2,000 US. This slots in at right around $1,400 US dollars. And so it gives us a nice third option here if you need to get some kind of extended reach and you don't have a budget, obviously, that goes out to the 100-400mm GM, or certainly beyond that to some of the super telephoto prime lens that very few people can afford. So a very, very welcome lens. Today's standard review is sponsored by Phantom Wallets, a great partner of this channel. Today's episode is brought to you by Phantom Wallet, the minimalist, modern wallet that sets you free from a bulky traditional wallet while also making it easy to access your cards and money when you need them, thanks to their unique fanning mechanism. Visit phantomwallet.com to check out their unique sizes, styles, and finishes that span from aluminum to wood to carbon fiber. You can even customize your wallet with new accessories like a money clip, cash holder, ID display, and even the Chipolo tracking integration if you're the kind of person who loses their wallet. Use code DUSTIN15 for 15% off when you're ready to check out. So we see a little bit of a different philosophy in the overall lens design of this particular lens relative to other Tamron lenses on Sony to this point. So we'll start on that point, in that there is a number of features here that we haven't previously seen. It does come with a tripod collar and foot that is fortunately not only completely removable, but I really like this kind of removable design that you can take it on and off even when it is attached to the camera. It does have a connection point for a strap. It also will allow you to, to rotate it around to your desired position, which is obviously always useful. And one of my favorite things that it has that the Sony doesn't is that it is an Arca-Swiss compatible tripod foot, which means you can go right onto a tripod and you don't have to mess around with using a quick release plate. Another new design element here is that we actually have switches on the barrel. In this case, there are 4 different ones. There's a focus limiter, 3-position focus limiter, an AF/MF switch, and on for the vibration compensation system, and then 3 different modes, including a new kind of mode in mode 3 that basically has the image stabilization active basically as much as when the camera is on, and so it's ready to go all the time. That's going to be your preferred mode for video. Your mode 2 is going to be for like panning, turning off one axis of stabilization, and then your mode 1 is going to be your kind of general purpose mode to turn to. Now, while the lens does have a traditional locking mechanism here on the side for the 150mm position, maybe for transport, it also has a much more useful, in my opinion, innovative clutch system that allows you to lock in at any zoom position. And it's very easy to go back and forth to use this in the field. And so if you want to hold a certain zoom position, just slide that clutch forward and it's locked into place. Very, very useful. It also does come with a nice lens hood that's far more shallow than the one that we see here on the Sony lens, but it does have that rubberized surface up front, you know, with the recognition that a lot of times people will stand lenses like this on the lens hood, and so it's reinforced and designed to take that weight. Now, obviously, what is radically different in terms of design relative to the Sony is that this is an externally zooming lens. It's internally focusing, but externally zooming. And so it grows about 8 centimeters in length, which does make their length a little bit closer, but particularly when the lens hood is attached, the Sony is still quite a bit bigger. But more importantly, in terms of the design philosophy, the Sony's approach is that it is an internally zooming design. Some people prefer that for weather sealing, and I will say that out in the field, I prefer the internally zooming because you can zoom really fast and of course utterly smoothly because there's no moving parts here. And so you can zoom faster and you can zoom more smoothly than what you can with the Tamron. So that's the advantage there. The Tamron does externally zoom as noted, but it is very thoroughly weather sealed, about 11 or 12 different seal points beginning at the lens gasket all the way through to flooring coating on the front element, and lots of seal points inside. Some people trust that, other people don't. Your mileage may vary, obviously. But what we do have is a much, much smaller lens for transport. In fact, this lens is somewhere near 110 millimeters shorter than what the Sony is, which makes it extremely compact for a lens that reaches out to 500 millimeters, and about 50 millimeters shorter than, say, one of the Tamron 150-600 millimeter lenses we've seen on DSLRs in the past. That's a huge advantage. And while there's not as big of a weight savings, we drop down to less than 200 grams of difference in weight. But, you know, having that, you know, reduced size means that for transporting, you just have a lot more options for how you can carry this lens, what you can put it in, and still get it out into the field. So for a lot of people, that's going to be an extremely valuable thing. And some people, they just don't want to deal with the size and the weight and the difficulties in transport of the 200-600, even though it is an exceptional lens. Also exceptional here is the autofocus system, and we have got their VXD, which, as I noted, is a very high torque linear motor focus that drives focus very fast, silently, smoothly, no issues there. And you can see that even with this, you know, extended focal length as I approach the camera, it does a good job of tracking my face and keeping up with all of that. It's been very smooth in operation wherever I've used it. I kind of expect that at this point, and that's been true of all of these Tamron lenses, but obviously with a lens like this, the question is going to be can you track fast action with it? And so I turned to my friends over at Jengar Golden's once again, and we met at the beach with 4 of their dogs, and I did a lot of tracking of action with both of these lenses. And what I found is that while the Sony, in terms of tracking accuracy, has about a 5 to 7% higher keeper rate than what the Tamron is. The Tamron was very close, and beyond that, it was definitely better than what I've seen with the Sigma 100-400 in terms of tracking difficult action and delivering more accurately focused results. And so, as you can see with all of these series, it really does an exceptional job of tracking action, even in difficult situations like some of the backlit ones that you have seen. And in fact, when I switched to a front lit subject where the lighting was more favorable, my keeper rate went up commensurately to where I missed very, very few. Out of 400 shots in that second series, I had 10 missed according to my count. And so a very, very high keeper rate. But there is one limiting principle here that is not Tamron's fault, but is Sony imposed. And that is if you use some of the faster sports cameras from Sony, in this case I'm reviewing on the Sony Alpha 1, unfortunately you end up being constricted by Sony as to the amount, the speed of your burst rate. And so it's limited to 15 frames per second, whereas if I switched over to the 200-600mm, I could get 30 frames per second. And if you're shooting on the Alpha 1 or Alpha 9 or A9 II, you're also going to get somewhere around 15 frames per second, though you're not losing quite as much. Now, if you're shooting with one of the R series bodies or an A7 III or something similar to that, you're not going to notice the difference because you're not hitting up against that imposed threshold. But it is something to just to bear in mind that you will be able to get as, for example, with this 200-600mm burst, I'm getting 30 frames per second. And so, over the course of a few seconds of this run, I had about almost 150 shots in that burst. And so, that is one advantage that you may want to consider. Another disadvantage here is that it seems like Sony is only allowing for teleconverters to work with first-party lenses. And so we've seen with both the Sigma and then these Tamron telephotos that there's not really room or design for the teleconverter to fit, whereas you can use them on this lens. So, a couple of kind of built-in advantages, unfortunately, that Sony is building for itself. Now, when it comes to the image quality, this lens, I knew it was going to be good looking at the MTFs and comparing them to the exceptionally good. I mean, this lens is amazingly good optically for this type of lens. And I could see that the Tamron was going to be very, very close. And that, in fact, was the case. I found that throughout the zoom range, so starting at 150mm, it was almost as good, almost identically good in the center of the frame, the Tamron. And the Sony did have a bit of advantage out on the edge of the frame. In the mid part of the zoom range, 200mm, 300mm, 400mm, there's very little difference between the two lenses. And even out at 500mm, I found that again, the center performance was about identical, but there was a significant advantage for the Sony out in the edge of the frame. And so, but for the most part, I would say you're getting, 97% of the resolution by comparison between the two lenses. And so I don't think that that's going to be a huge differentiating factor for anyone, particularly since very often with telephotos, it's going to be the center performance that is most important anyway. What I also found is that I was really, really pleased with the bokeh performance from this lens. It just really produced great looking images, and it has a little bit of an advantage in one area when it comes to this. And that while the 200-600 has a pretty big 2.4 meter minimum focus distance, you can get as close at 150mm on this lens as close as 60 centimeters, 0.6 meters, and at the 500mm range, 1.8 meters. And so what that means is that while you only get a 0.20 times magnification at best from the Sony lens, at 150mm you can get about 0.33 times magnification and 0.27 times magnification at 500mm. And so you've got a lot of versatility in between there as to how close you can get to your subject and really get really great looking reproduction type results out of this lens. So it extends the usefulness of it. I also found that flare resistance was very good, and it's got the second generation of Tamron's B-bar coatings, and so obviously that's it's doing a great job there. It also controlled chromatic aberrations pretty much perfectly, and then both distortion and vignette, both at 150mm and at 500mm, were quite low, and surprisingly lower still at 500mm than 150mm, where there's just a little bit more pincushion distortion and just a tiny bit more vignette. But in no case was it very strong, making this lens a very, very strong lens optically. And so really, as far as what Tamron has done here, they've checked basically all the boxes. is. It's, nice and portable, has a nice quality of build with a lot of, professional grade elements of this design. It's got great autofocus and it has great image quality. There are those two unfortunate factors that seem to be Sony imposed, where you can't use teleconverters and you're capped out on the sports bodies at 15 frames per second. I suspect that many people can probably live with both of those limitations. And if that is you, this is a very highly competent lens in a much more attractive package if your priority is portability, in the Tamron 150-500mm RXD lens. And so at the end of the day, I think Tamron's done a great job with this lens, and it's well worth your consideration if you're looking for an affordable super telephoto zoom lens. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my full text review. Also linkage there to an image gallery if you want to check out more of these photos. Beyond that, there are buying links there. There's also linkage to purchase some of my merchandise, and you can follow me on social media, become a patron, sign up for my newsletter that comes out on Thursdays. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Be sure to ring that bell to get notifications when new content drops. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.